Hi guys, welcome to Cow Corner Cricket Cast. I'm your host Pratham. I'm joined by my mate Rohan, and today we're going to be discussing, in this IPL 2021 season, the Eliminator match, a showdown between the Royal Challengers Bangalore and the Kolkata Knight Riders. And going into this match, Rohan, I mean, the name says it all, right? One of these teams reaching.
It's win or go home. It's win or go home from now on for everybody.
Yep. So a sad story for whichever team would finish fourth. Their aspirations would be cut short pretty quickly, and especially given that these two teams, it's been a long while since they won a title. There was this burning desire to try to make sure that they could get something amidst the CSK Mumbai supremacy, especially because Mumbai had been knocked out. So both of these teams would have been eyeing.
Not an issue. So you just got to beat one team, man. You got to beat one team, and if you can beat that team, you might have a chance at starting a dynasty right before the mega auction happens.
True. But so both of these sides were looking really keenly on what sort of pitch would be offered up in the Sharjah cricket stadium coming into this match, because throughout this tournament, the Sharjah wicket has been a source of contention for both of these sides. It's been a pitch where there's been traditionally a lack of batter-friendly conditions, to put it politely, right? No bounce, the pitch dying and getting slower as it carries on. Not any sort of real assistance or sideways movement for batters, but just a bunch of inconsistent bounce. So really a nightmare pitch for a T20 scenario, and especially a nightmare pitch for a T20 scenario involving a qualifier where all eyes are glued and they want to see exciting cricket. Fortunately, Rohan, we got a different sort of surface this time in Sharjah, one which actually had a bit of a characteristic sheen, the Sharjah sheen as it's called. It's very common in 80s and 90s Indo-Pakistan cricket matches. And essentially, guys, what it looks like is essentially a pitch that is devoid entirely of grass, but has this sort of reflective surface that you can see basking in the sun. And that essentially translates into a pitch that offers some even, if maybe slightly lower, on the lower side, I should say, carry and bounce to it, apart from the odd one that sort of stops in the pitch. And that, combined with the short boundaries on this ground, but the slightly slow outfield, meant that this surface promised to provide sort of a more balanced set of scores in both innings, with about 150 odd score looking on the cards as a par total, effectively, right? And critically, in this do-or-die match, RCB won the toss. They chose to bat. A bit of a contentious decision in my book, Rohan, because we've seen that chasing, I should say, in these matches is generally the better bet in Sharjah because of the dew factor, because of other aspects. But RCB went with it regardless. Virat Kohli at the toss won it, chose to bat. And in the end, Virat Kohli will be left to be ruining that decision because his team got knocked
especially
out.
in his last match as RCB skipper. So
yeah. Sad for him. Very opposite feelings for Ian Morgan in the other camp. His team's now going to progress to one step closer to that title. But guys, we would like you all to take a look at the scorecards, and then when you come back, we'll be providing our specific thoughts for the match. Yep. So coming back to the specifics of the match itself, right? I want to start off with the opening partnership between Devdutt Padikkal and Virat Kohli, Ron, because once again, they showed why they're considered amongst the best power play opening partnerships in this IPL 2021 season. Obviously, a couple that I would rank higher than them, Faf, Ruturaj, maybe Shaw and Dhawan, but they're right up there, right? And a huge reason why I thought that was the case, Ron, is how they sort of are contrasting styles of players, but they sort of, when allied together, sort of have create a best of both worlds in a sense, right?
I was thinking of that. I was thinking back to previous IPLs, Shane Watson and Faf du Plessis, similar kind of situation.
Yeah.
Again, like one guy is going to be a little bit slower and a little bit more conservative and run a lot more. The other guy's just there to hit.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And even though neither of these quite fit that mold of the du Plessis-Watson mold that you're referring to, they have these sort of contrasting benefits and styles that keep different bowlers having to adjust constantly, right? And that's a huge factor behind it. But today specifically, right, it was just a perfect example of the yin and the yang that makes this partnership so good, because Devdutt Padikkal today, his capability as sort of like the languid left-hander, the really like laid-back but classy one, was on show today because he was able to use the pace of the bowler to steer and sort of transmit deliveries down to the boundary behind square of the wicket on the offside, right? And that allowed him to sort of keep runs ticking on a surface where, coincidentally, boundaries behind square of the wicket are 15 to 20 meters lesser than when you have to play those shots straighter, beyond square, down the wicket, right? So that in itself was a really good sort of tactical nous in some extent to him. Also just stylistically something at home that he's natural with. But then you compare that to Kohli, right, who is a right-hander, much more forceful, right, but also capable of playing the anchoring role. But critically today, his precision and confidence at punching and sort of driving that ball through that cover region, right? Again, completely opposite side of the ground here from Devdutt's scoring region that I was talking about before, right? The advantage of Kohli playing this way is that it allows him to pounce on anything that's full to thread the gaps in that region, right? So sometimes he'll even back away to place shots in that region, almost like inside-out cover drives and so forth, despite the ball pitching straighter, right? So those individual strengths combined made it very difficult for bowlers when the strike was being rotated by these two, which was being done frequently, which is a commonality of a strength together. It made it very difficult for them to adjust and set up lines and lengths. And that's actually the reason why I thought they were able to sort of motor easily to that 49-run partnership, on one short of a 50-run stand, inside 5 overs of the power play, right? It was brilliant to watch.
I wanted to bring up one interesting thing I've seen Owen Morgan and Baz McClellan introduce, which is that idea that they use 2 spinners in the power play.
Yeah.
For 1 over each. But it was, again, it's the second time they've done this. And I like the idea as sort of a change-up, especially because they don't have 3 seamers. They have 2 seamers. They picked 2 seamers in the squad. That's an excellent way of hiding the fact that you've only picked 2 seamers. Yeah,
because you can spread them out more across the innings. You can make them be your strike bowlers so they can go a little bit harder, a little bit more aggressively. Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a great strategy, but I will say there were flaws in that approach that Devdutt and Virat were able to exploit. And again, coming back to that partnership.
It's just, I just noticed that and I was like, this is very brave, and I think that typified KKR's bowling in this innings. It was a team effort. It was courageous.
Absolutely, man, absolutely. Because we talked about the sort of decision to vary up the bowlers together, right? But one bowler who didn't vary up in terms of how many overs he bowled throughout the innings, but was still very effective, right? And was able to get his prime spot in part because the likes of Shakib and Chakravarti, the 2 other spinners in this lineup, were able to bowl in those first 6 overs, was the ace spinner, right? Really for KKR. The ace in the hole, Sunil Narine, right? And he proved why he's so special for this team, right? He was exceptional today in sort of strangulating and knocking over that middle order from RCB, right? Deadly players.
He was so exceptional. ESPN does sort of a team value, which actually a stat, if you buy into that or not. But according to that stat, he was twice as valuable as the next best player. And I believe it. And by their estimation, he probably should have taken 2 more wickets in this match.
He would have gotten a 6 foot.
I don't necessarily disagree with them. I think they're quite right on that. The way he was bowling.
Absolutely, man. And to your point, right? why was he so special or effective today, right? A couple of factors. A, like a lot of good spinners in this IPL cycle, he alternated very well between his stock delivery and his variation, right? So he has the stock delivery, the off spinner, which turns in the right-hander, and the carom ball that slightly veers away, right? And it could have been very easy to get tempted, being like, hey, I bowl from an action anyways that sort of I hide the ball from, so it's very difficult for them to see. I'm just going to vary it like a carom ball.
I'm just going to bowl a bunch of carom balls.
Yeah,
right?
I'm going to bowl a bunch of carom balls, and I'm going to make one off spinner with one carom ball. That could have been the thing that he did. But he realized that on this surface, right, if he did that, there was a chance of becoming too predictable and for him to be found out and played. So he only used that carom ball once or maybe twice and over at most, right? And out of his 4 overs, and that was really useful. And then he also adjusted the pace on it, right? Because the wicket deliveries that he took, right, a lot of them were slower and slightly fuller, but still on just a good length, to not quite full. But then his regular stock delivery was on closer to the back of a length sort of delivery that was a bit quicker, right? So very clever adjustments
I also wanted to bring this up. One thing that I really liked about how he bowled was that when he bowled his off break, he committed to bowling the off break.
Yeah.
It was a lot of spinners, especially in the IPL, they don't commit to bowling spin. They bowl their spin and it's very flat. It doesn't turn. It doesn't have the loopiness. It doesn't have. It's basically just trying to bowl fast enough.
Yeah, but it's not getting enough revs on the ball, right? So Narine was trying to get revs on the ball.
He revved that ball, and it was brilliant delivery. Specifically, the delivery that gets Kohli. Yeah. Virat Kohli is one of the, or if not the best, or he is certainly one of the best batsmen against spin bowling in the world.
Yes, and even though he's had some recent struggles against spin in this IPL cycle, he's still incredibly good.
He's still up there. He's up in the top 5. Certainly top 5 in the IPL cricket.
Yeah.
To get him with just an off break, not a carom ball, nothing special. It was a good off break, good length, good line. Get him. And then the next over, turn around and pull and get AB de Villiers, a guy who has been murdering spinners since like the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
That's not normal. Is what I think the best way to put it.
No, it's not. It's special, right? And again, I think to your point, right? Like part of the reason why he committed so much with that off break, because I've seen him at times lay off from that, was he saw the nature of the pitch, right? Previous Sharjah pitches that have been played here haven't really offered much to spinners in terms of sideways movement. But this one, the odd one turned and the odd one stopped in the wicket. And that's why, coming back to the point of length, right? It was so clever from Narine to bowl those lengths that were, whether the slightly fuller, slower ones, or the hard spun back of the length, sort of off breaks, right? The regulation off breaks. What he realized is that with Narine, because he's not a big turner of the ball, right? Batsmen can often easily get to the pitch of the ball and hit him with the assurance that the ball won't deviate at the last moment. That will allow them to, not miscue their shot and get out. If the ball pitch isn't turning. But because this pitch was giving him just that slight bit of assistance, right, he realized that if he dragged his leg just a little bit back, right, and had that odd one that acted up, basically, batsmen weren't going to be able to commit as easily like a front foot forward stride to him. And then thus they were going to try to go and hit across the line on a pitch where, because of that slight...
Doing that is a bad idea.
Yeah, it was a bad idea, and it cashed in, right? Because there's so many bowls and LBWs that he got, right?
Yeah.
Because of that, especially in T20 cricket, right? People go after the variations. They think, if you have a bunch of variations, you're a great bowler. But you have to, like what this match showed and what Narine's performance showed is you can have all the variations in the world, or even 2, like Narine just has with this remodeled action of his. But if you know how to accurately frustrate the bowlers with your stock delivery, that variation is going to go well. And as long as you bowl the line and length that is suited to the wicket, like Narine did, and bowl intelligently, you will have success. And this was a prime example of that. I want to also give a shout out here to another bowler who I think helped Narine take those wickets in part by the sort of pressure that he was exerting throughout the passage of the innings. And that was Lockie Ferguson, right?
Oh, yeah. Lockie has been huge coming. It's hard to step in Pat Cummins' shoes. First of all, he's very big and has very big feet. So, and second of all, he's the best bowler on the planet. So it's hard. It's a hard job coming in to replace Pat Cummins. And Lockie Ferguson's taken it on with like full aplomb.
Yeah, and I'll go as far to say that in the IPL, because I mean, Pat Cummins has had his struggles in this last season in the IPL. He's actually done a better job of even Pat that I've seen in the IPL in general.
It's hard to believe.
It is. But again, man, like
almost bear it out.
That's what ferocious pace does, right? Like, because when you bowl that quick, right? Because he was breaching like the 150 kilometer per hour mark, like consistently, especially in his last 2 overs. He hit that mark like 4 or 5 times in those 2 overs, right, out of 12 balls. And he averaged easily 90 miles per hour throughout that entire like 4 overs that he gave in general, right? He and because he's tall like Pat Cummins, right? He's one of the few bowlers who can get on a surface like this, which is playing slightly low, the ball to bounce sharply, right? Because I saw it like even DK was having to like take balls that were pounding into his gloves chest height, right? Which is not what you expect on a Sharjah wicket like this. Just not.
And also, what I have to say is that Lockie Ferguson in full flight is one of the most entertaining bowlers to watch in the IPL.
Yeah,
because he is so quick and he gets so much balance, and as you were saying, he gets a lot of pace, a lot of bounce, but he's also very smart about how he bowls.
Exactly, and to your point, right? He bowls like today. He bowled in a spurt that like those really good back of a length deliveries that he was hitting, the hard length as we like calling it in Test match cricket, with a foolish slower ball, right? That was well disguised, but more importantly, because it's so full, right? It makes it very hard for the batsman to actually be able to connect the middle of the bat and hit during the death overs, which Lockie was used in part during, and hit those aerial shots above the fielders, right? Because they keeps on hitting the bottom of the bat. So it's very, especially because they're looking at the ball from the really quicker perspectives. They're already adjusting for the ball to come at a higher bounce, and so when the slower ball comes in with slightly lesser bounce, it causes them problems at that full length. So again, just clever bowling, right? Like clever bowling combined with this brilliance of just how good his stock delivery again is, right? We talked about it with spinners, but it happens with pacers as well. If you have your stock delivery that's solid, right, the variation becomes incredibly more effective, especially if you use the right lines and lengths for that variation, right? And overall, I agree with you, man. I mean, with the exception of Mavi, who had a bit of a poor match, which we'll get on to later, this was a really good performance from KKR.
Oh, let's talk about RCB's chase, or their attempted chase, or whatever the heck. Let's say not their attempted chase.
Attempted defense. KKR chase, great.
KKR chase.
But yeah, I mean, again, you have to start at the beginning of the innings, right? Because there's a part of this match that's not going to get noted by anyone because it didn't produce any wickets, it didn't produce any like exciting deliveries per se, but has to be noted for how solidly spectacular it was in a way. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it isn't. And I'm talking about, guys, Siraj's first 3 overs in that power play, right? He didn't get a wicket, okay, and he hasn't this entire IPL season. And it's a shame because he's taken. I was looking this up, Rowan. He took 1 wicket in his last 9 matches for RCB this season in the power play, which is insane to me. Just insane.
No, I mean, it's especially insane considering how good he is with seam presentation.
Yes,
and
yes.
Getting swing. It's like, how are you? What?
Yeah. But today, even though the figures might not show it in those first 3 overs, he totally justified the faith of the RCB management, Kohli, and you know their team, right, as the first choice new ball bowler, right? Because his pace was consistently up again between, like Lockie Ferguson, very high on this pitch. One of the few bowlers who was able to get the ball to bounce above waist high consistently. He was between the 140 to 145 kilometers per hour range. He bowled that hard back of a length test match length, right? And that was very difficult for the batsman to handle because, you know, on a lowish pitch, obviously they're expecting the ball to come in at a lower height But when it comes up a little bit higher than usual, it sort of hits the spice of the bat, and they struggle a bit with it. But then he also varied that up with some really well-directed middle stump Yorkers or low full tosses, which made the KKR openers, Gill and Iyer, right, have to dig it out. And it was sensible even given the fields, because there were two men at mid-on and mid-off, right? You'll always hear this from fast bowlers who bowl Yorkers, have your mid-on and mid-off straighter, right? And they were straight today. And so bowling that middle stump Yorker, right, they had to dig it in, and it went straight to the field. So they couldn't really get too many runs for it, right? And in the end, his spell, I think, went for, if I'm not mistaken, like under 6 runs and over, right? Which highly impressive.
I do want to give a shout out because the guy his opponent in this spell, Shubman Gill, fantastic. I mean, there's nothing you can really say. You can't take anything away from him.
Yeah, these sort of pitches where he's chasing a low total, it allows him to set himself up, give a little bit more time, play that anchoring role. And once again, he was good. He rotated the strike well.
Hit a lot of fours. He hit more fours. He hit the same number of fours as the rest of his team.
Yeah. And again, guys, Gill was part of the reason why Gill's suited to wickets like here in Sharjah is because he plays straight, right? You saw in the RCB innings, many of their batsmen got out by playing across the line, right? Gill plays straight, and that's why he was able to get them to a decent start. But that start did go right. Yuzvendra Chahal again bowling with that guile, giving the ball some air, getting them to tantalizingly try to hit it out of the park and getting out. And so RCB managed to pull things back from that KKR chase after that solidish start. But unfortunately, the man who didn't rise to the occasion and let them down, Virat Kohli, in terms of his captaincy. And I'll point out to two specific things that I thought that he did that sort of really lost this match from the middle overs onward. Because, yes, guys, the match went to the last over, and there were only 4 wickets left, really, when they won. But the match effectively was over as a really tight entity that KKR weren't in the lead of, because of these middle over fumbles from Virat's captaincy in my mind. And there were 2 of them. The first of them being bringing on Dan Christian, right? I get that he had to bowl the 5th bowler at some time. Garden was struggling first up, hasn't really looked...
We're going to come to him.
Yeah.
In a few minutes.
Because clearly he was not having a great day, and he hasn't had a great IPL period. But you could understand that they needed to give the 5th bowler some overs in the middle so that they could rotate out their bowlers and make sure that they had overs left to defend this total, right? But the reason why it was a terrible decision was Sunil Narine comes into the wicket, right? Teams across T20 periods have figured out that Sunil Narine, because he's not a full-line batsman, right? Because he is really a T20, sort of stylish hack, but a hack nonetheless, right? And I like Narine, but I'm being honest here. He doesn't really have the great footwork and so forth. They know that he is very susceptible to the short ball. So you needed a pacer, even somebody like Harshal Patel who bowls in the 130s, low 130s. You needed somebody who could bowl a short ball to Narine and make him try to hook on this pitch. But who did they end up bowling in his 1 over or at around the 9th over or so forth when Narine came in? Dan Christian, a guy who bowls 120 to 125 clicks, right? So not going to be able to bowl that short ball to really get it up in the rib or challenge Narine. And a guy, and he got tonked because he was just the perfect pace for somebody like Narine who was looking to swing the bat. And I mean, it just wasn't sensible. And the other thing was, right, Chahar showed, Varun Chakravarti showed, Narine showed that on this pitch, spinners were able to get some assistance off of it, right? They were the guys who were strangulating the batting orders, especially in the KKR first, the RCB first innings, right? It was Varun Chakravarti, Narine, and Shakib who were the ones who were economical and really making them set a total very difficult, right? You needed to have Shahbaz Ahmed on. I understand, again, like with the previous decision from Kohli regarding Christian. I get it. there are left-handers, two left-handers. Bringing on Shahbaz in the middle overs is a risky proposition because they could hit through their arc and hit through their line, right? But
you've got to try something.
Yeah, you've got to try something, right? The match
you've got to take somebody. You have to take somebody's wicket. You have to take a wicket when you're and this is something that, like, I think that this is what separates teams that are good at defending small totals from teams that aren't. CSK is probably the best example of this. CSK, when they don't know what else to do, they'll toss it to somebody who they normally don't let bowl. Someone like I don't know, Moeen Ali.
Yeah.
He might take a wicket, or let's toss it to if they're really desperate, Ambati Raidu. Why? Because he might take a wicket, and it's worth the risk.
It is, and especially with Shahbaz.
Because what's the worst that's going to happen, right? He goes for like 20 and over. Okay, that's fine. We're anyway losing.
Yeah, Dan Christian went for that anyways, right? Like, you know, and to your point, right, Rohan, Shahbaz also has this sort of left arm flight and loop that is very tempting. He's a left-armer,
right? And that is not something that a lot of batsmen face anyway.
Right, even left-handed batsmen. But the point being, right, like, he has that sort of flight and loop of a classical action that makes the batsman want to come down the pitch and tonk him. And so it could have actually caused somebody like Narine to get stumped even, right? So it was worth the gamble, and it was a real mistake by him. But speaking of Narine, right, the guy who actually finished off the match effectively for KKR in a sense.
You put them in a position from which they never really have to worry about the match after that. Yeah. He
was great because yes, he was given a bunch of buffet balls from Dan Christian. Yes, life was made easier because of that tactical blunder from Kohli. But you've got to give credit for him for coming up that order at number 5. We've seen some promotions in the previous matches where that hasn't quite worked out, right? The decision to move up Akshar in the order and then Thakur in the order.
Like, the last match made no sense, but like this match, it made perfect sense to do that, and it worked because it made perfect sense and it was a sensible decision.
Yeah, and Narine showed why it was a sensible decision
by another New Zealander.
Yeah, and he showed why it was a sensible decision, right, Rohan, which is the important part, because he exploited the fact that Dan Christian bowled a couple in the slot, hit him straight mainly, and then the one delivery that he hit square of the wicket was one that was short and nice and slow and sat up. So again, sensible batting from him, targeting fifth bowler option, really finished the match for KKR. Coming, over to the takeaways that each side can sort of look at and sort of perhaps keep in mind going forward, right? Even though RCB is knocked off, just for the next season.
I mean, look, it's something that they probably need to take a look at anyway. So let's start with KKR. The first takeaway, the takeaway I have is this was a very good performance. I think we can all agree that this was a really good performance. This is a performance that, if you want to win the IPL, this is the performance you need to repeat week in and week out.
Yes, you need to be as consistent.
It's not just being consistent; it's being precise about your consistency.
Yes.
You can consistently win, but you can't. But you also have to be consistently precise about how you win. Exactly. They had a game plan. They executed that game plan. That's the first thing I have as a takeaway. That was a really, really, really well thought out game plan that McCullum and Morgan drew up, and good, and it relies on good bowling.
Yeah, and the bowlers worked well together. There was a synergy. They partnered each other. The strike bowlers were given the ability to strike like Lockie. You had the spinners who were strangulating it. They came and varied up the overs.
This was a well thought out plan, well executed. One thing that they have to improve on, right, is Mavi. Yeah. I love Mavi. I think that he's going to be the next Indian strike bowler.
Yeah, he's got a lovely action to wrist to swing the ball, especially inward. Yeah,
and he's been really good. He's a huge reason why this team is in the knockouts.
Yeah, I mean our Rajasthan match, just for reference.
The Rajasthan match on its own is why they're in. Just his performance in that match, and that's why everyone who's ever seen him thinks that he might be one of the special bowlers.
Yeah, but he's got to improve his skill set at the death.
You cannot, if you are one of those bowlers, you cannot go at 9 and over in a tight match like this. Especially if KKR is sticking with that 5 bowler attack. You need everyone to go at under 8.
Yes.
to work on a wicket
Yes.
like this.
And if he's consistently being that expensive, right, it is a problem. And Rowan, to your point, right, yes, he was a little bit wayward with his opening spell today, but really the problem for Mavi and why that economy rate is so high is his death bowling, right? His death bowling consistently, I've seen now, it's too wide. Sometimes it's too short, but it's also a situation where he's not using his variation. We talk about variations, right? That's a theme of this match in a sense. He's not using his one variation that he bowls really well in this match nearly enough, right? He needs to bowl that off-cutter more, and he needs to bowl it around a fourth stump line so he can get the wickets in play, and he can create that slight bit of extra bounce.
If he wants to make that next step to becoming an Indian national team player, that is a step he needs to take.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But let's talk about the more interesting and fun aspect of this, because we get to now laugh at the most impotent and useless team in the IPL. And I'm saying that because it's RCB. Yeah. RCB didn't lose this game because
another campaign lost, right? Yeah, I take plenty of joy rejoicing in RCB's failure.
I think
even though that's going to make me
RCB
sadistic.
Fans rejoice at the failure of RCB.
Yes, because they've ruined themselves, right? To your point, right? And specifically, how do they ruin themselves? They don't develop good enough depth in their bowling options.
They never do. This is the Virat Kohli syndrome. You see this in every team Virat Kohli is either captained or has been a part of, unless someone like Dhoni is in charge of the team.
But point being, right? Like
they just don't have depth.
They don't have depth. They don't have depth. Yeah, absolutely, right. And even with that batting firing, even a pick like Maxwell, who has been missing in the IPL for so many years, firing for them, right? The reality of the matter is why they're failing so often has to do constantly with the fact that they have the bowlers, right? The strike bowlers are the likes of Garden and Dan
let's bring that. Let's hold on. Let's just hold on to that thought for a second here. Has anyone who has ever paid attention to the IPL know who this guy was? Like, I turned on the match and I was like, who the heck is this guy and why is he on my screen?
I only know him because domestic, I'm one of the few 5 people who's Indian who actually follows English domestic cricket, and I saw the 100.
Even by English domestic, and I'm one of the other people that follows English domestic cricket. And I'm like, okay, but why him?
Yeah, and it's because also you can see, right, his pace was down, even in the 100, which he was very effective at, right?
He was, and I do, and I'm not shitting on the 100 on this channel. I will never shit on it. I think it's a terrible idea, just because it just clogs up the English cricket calendar.
Right,
but that's a different discussion.
But the point you're making at large is, right, when you pick Garden as one of your strike bowlers, right, and you pick the likes of Shahbaz Ahmed, right, when you don't pick a proper strike bowler, somebody like a Mitchell Starc, I know he took a pardon here, but somebody of that caliber, right, to pair up with Harshal, Patel and Siraj, you're not going to succeed. And you're just not. It's not so much as a player of their caliber. You could pick a domestic player, and this is the thing that I hate the most about RCB. And this isn't on Virat Kohli. Virat Kohli is a mediocre captain in my view, right? But it's on the team manager. It really is on the team.
He has no say in this, right? His job is to take that team. He has very little say in this, right? Yeah. His job is to take the team that he is given with the coach and work together to come up with a plan to take these players into the playoffs. And I think he's done a very good job of that in this season, right? It was a chaotic season. A whole bunch of stuff went down.
Yeah,
he managed to drag this team out of that morass of the midfield.
Absolutely, they looked different from previous RCB seasons, especially some of the horrible ones they had recently, where they finished 8th and so forth. They looked like a team that had a legitimate shot of winning this. But again, the flaw.
This result, this game.
Yeah.
Yes, was his captaincy perfect? No. I think we can agree. Pratham's pointed out several points why that isn't. But this isn't on Virat Kohli. This is on RCB as an organization.
Yes.
You should not have, going into a playoff game, a bowler that literally no one has ever heard of.
And he's your striker.
As one of your seam bowling options. As one of your spearheads.
And that to an overseas player who's taking us up a slot, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is, right, RCB always does this. They pick an overseas player simply for the virtue of them being an overseas player.
Yeah. And because there's often hype surrounding them, but they never bother to actually validate or corroborate whether that's actually...
Or even understand how this player plays.
with the conditions, which Garden doesn't.
Sucks that Virat Kohli had to go out in his last match as skipper and see his team play the most Virat Kohli RCB match imaginable, where they failed to defend a difficult total because they don't score enough runs, because their batting is paper thin, and then they can't defend that total because their bowling is somehow thinner.
You're right, in crunch matches. Precisely, right? And it's good that you brought the VK sort of performance, because this actually just reminds me of VK in clutch test matches, right? And a criticism I often have from him is the lack of fielding in crunch match situations, right? We're talking like, when the game is on a knife's edge, he's often in the slips, he drops a lot of catches, right? And that sort of Butterfinger mentality sort of I've seen happen with RCB, the team at large as well, and it's one of my key takeaways, Rohan, from this match, right? You cannot keep on dropping regulation catches in crunch matches and expect to win those matches, right? There were 2 drops today. One, denying Purple Patel his 33rd wicket to break that record, a really sad moment, right? Off Narine.
It must be frustrating for him, by the way.
Yeah, but Particle dropped it off Narine, who had hit those 3 sixes, and if he had gotten out early, maybe it could have spoiled the collapse. So that alone was there. But then even earlier on, right, Venkatesh Iyer, right, a guy who's been in phenomenal form this IPL, again getting dropped, right, off Chahal, and being dropped again by pretty much a very regulation catch again, right, by Shahbaz Ahmed, right? And you just can't keep on doing that and expect to win playoff matches. And it cost them today, right? A bit, right? It might have not got them, none of these guys went on to get a 50 or anything, but they got starts and they could have been dismissed earlier on. So you have to, that's my key takeaway for RCB. For KKR, the team that actually has a shot now in, winning this thing, my key takeaway for them would really be Morgan's captaincy, as you mentioned, right? There was a game plan, and it was executed upon, but I think that there were some chinks even with that in the beginning of the innings, right? And it's not the spinner's fault. I think it really has to do with Morgan's inability to set fielders that are closer inside the 30-yard circle to those spinners, right? Because Virat Kohli and Devdutt Particle in that 49-run opening partnership really exploited this, in that they were able to scamper for really quick singles. And the reason why they were able to do that was because the fielders that were designed to stop the flow of runs, right, that were in close, were just outside that 30-yard circle. So they could just tap the ball and quickly run a single or two. Whereas if those fielders were kept even, 3 or 4, 5 feet in, or just a little bit inward, right, they would have had a much more chance of restricting that sort of single and that rotation of the strike. I think on that note, it's as good as any to sort of sign off. Join us because we're going to be covering KKR once again as they take on Delhi Capitals in the second qualifier of this IPL, the penultimate match. So stay tuned for our coverage of that. Stay safe, guys, and see us tomorrow.
See you.